We are now very happy to welcome the Reverend Judith Elia back to us from Bethlehem. We're going to talk about honoring Jesus as a Palestinian Jew, lessons I learned serving in Palestine.
So it is only fitting that you are the community that I speak to on Ceasefire Day. I have been so grateful to be with you for so much of my life, really, but especially in the last couple of years. You have been just the most amazing community for me, of a place where it's safe to talk about all of the things that are happening in the world without censorship. So I just want to acknowledge you for that, and for your giant hearts as wide as the world, and your ability to hear and contemplate and vision maybe the beginnings of peace on earth for everybody. I want to keep a kernel of hope in my heart for that. So we celebrate the ceasefire and we honor Martin Luther King. And Martin Luther King once said, "We are confronted with the fierce urgency of now." We need a genuine revolution of values, and all religions know the supreme unifying principle of life. King actually said, "The Hindu, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, Buddhist belief is summed up in the Epistle of John. Let us love one another. For love is of God, and everyone that loves is of God and knows God. And if you don't love, you're not knowing God. And that is because God is love. If we love one another, God dwells in us, and love is perfected in us." So being in the Holy Land of Israel, Palestine, and Jordan for the last 2.5 months, I have experienced a lot of Palestinian Christian ceremonies, and also a lot of Jewish ceremonies and holidays, and a lot of Islamic holidays and ceremonies. And I have prayed in a lot of mosques, and in especially the Church of the Nativity and the Christmas Church. And I have spent a lot of time contemplating, who is this Palestinian Jew Jesus? And I have experienced so many different forms of Christianity being practiced in the same place, Nativity Square, by Syrian Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, all forms of Catholics, different forms of Ethiopian churches, and Christian evangelical Lutherans, and also Presbyterians. And it has been a revelation to me that after all these thousands of years, these sects that we now call Christianity, that really came from this Palestinian Jew who never knew that word Christianity, are diverse and they don't get along. In fact, on Orthodox Christmas, it was amazing how many processionals there were of men in fancy robe with gilded candles in all different Christian denominations. And it really didn't do a thing for me. I didn't get it. I didn't feel it. I didn't experience anything about it that was holy, really. And I started to think about that, because I've been in a lot of ceremonies my whole life, indigenous ceremonies and interfaith ceremonies and lots of different kinds of ceremonies, but this was really divisive. You know, it was people in different parts of the church doing worship at the place that was supposedly where Jesus was born, but not in harmony, in competition with each other, and also at different times throughout the day, and especially this processional where thousands of people were standing there, and all these men in all these fancy robes with these golden candles were processing up and down and preaching to a mass of people that couldn't even hear what they were saying. It left me really empty. And one of the things that I learned while I was there, and you can actually Google this, and you can go on YouTube and you can find it, is that the Ethiopian Bible is the oldest Bible that we have. It actually dates back, it's been carbon dated to 300 AD, way before any of the other Bibles. And some of you may know that the other Bibles were canonized by a very political arm of the Christian church, the coming together of the Roman political movement along with the Christian tradition, which made it very different than I think Jesus meant. When you read the Ethiopian Bible, you see a very different depiction of Adam and Eve. Eve was not pulled out of Adam's rib. Eve was made by God looking for the brightest morning stars and pulling them down along with the light of the moon and creating a woman who had shimmering light and the light of 1,000 stars in her eyes. And she was different than Adam. She could see things that Adam couldn't see, and she could communicate with all life forms. She and Adam had different gifts, but they were equal. There are also many other differences in the Ethiopian Bible that led Pope Francis to say, we've been misleading Christians for thousands of years. If you look at the time period in which Jesus lived, there was tremendous political conflicts, religious and political persecution, violent crimes, terrifying barbaric torture like mass crucifixions, guerrilla warfare. And it actually is not unlike the Middle East today. There were many warring factions within Judaism, just as there are today. And the neighboring tribes and the cultures and the lands that live nearby were also divisively persecuted and hated by the Jewish people. But Jesus did not hate. He loved his enemies, quote unquote, and he reached out to the Samaritan woman at the well, and Samaritans were hated by the current regime of Israel, the elite cabal of leaders, not unlike today. Not the people, but the leaders. They had all kinds of rules about who you could eat with and who you could like and who you could break bread with. And Jesus violated all of those. He ate with everyone. He taught everyone. And if you really read the Bible and then you try to figure out where those places are, that the people that came to hear Jesus, they're all over the Middle East. And he, at the time that he lived, had a great heart for anyone that came to hear his teaching. He was a Unitarian and a Universalist. He was, because Unitarian means the kingdom of God is within us, right? There is this spark of divinity within us. And in the Ethiopian Bible, it says that there is a spark of divinity within us, and it cannot be extinguished. And that the fall from grace was not a one-time thing. The fall from grace is a process that people go through of beginning to believe that the material reality is the only reality. And they deny their spiritual gifts. They deny their ability of direct communication with the spiritual world, and they stop seeing it. It's like a crack that they can't see through anymore. In the midst of all these different sects and beliefs of Judaism, there was this courageous Jew proclaiming out loud his resistance to authority. His acts of going against protocol and the current societal norms, he called out the people in control, the people who were murdering people, and ultimately crucified him. He called them hypocrites, blind guides, and thick-necked vipers. And in a society that saw prestige and money and status as the greatest goals of human life, he ministered to the poor and tried to help us to understand the treasure hidden in the field that is worth everything. If you find that treasure, that spark of divinity within you, you sell everything. Jesus also made a choice to be baptized by his cousin John, who also was a heretic, living off the grid in the wilderness, eating locusts and honey for food, and turning up his nose at the values of his society. And John welcomed and baptized everyone: sinners, prostitutes, tax collectors, soldiers, scribes, and even the elite Pharisees and Sadducees. He told them all, quite frankly, repent and sin no more. He even challenged Herod, which eventually got him beheaded. And Jesus followed in the footsteps of John. He also continued to call out all those who were oppressing people everywhere across the world. And he also told stories that shocked them, like the Good Samaritan. You know, the word good and Samaritan in the same line was not something they knew, right? The people he was telling that to were just shocked that there was, you know, the story of the Good Samaritan. There was a man that was hurting, and he had been beaten up, and everything had been taken by robbers. And the rabbi walked right by. And the lawyer, the Levite, walked right by. But the Samaritan opened his purse, put the man on the donkey, and brought him to an inn and told the innkeeper to take care of him. And Jesus says, you know, so who is the person of God? You know, who is the one that's going to be the one that makes it to the promised land? It's the Samaritan. Samaritans still exist to this day. And you may not know this, but one of the reasons that they were hated and distrusted and oppressed is because of their expansiveness in consciousness. They included idol worship, what other people called idol worship. Like they didn't exclude the indigenous ceremonies in their worship. They had various forms of worship, and they were inclusive, and they were non-judgmental, and they were Jews, but they also were not identified by their ethnic group. They expanded to include other ethnicities, other cultural traditions, other people within their circle of Samaria. Samaria also was known by Joseph Campbell to be an egalitarian society from the beginning and had highly evolved structures of their culture. So it's really interesting. The Middle East is this hotbed of violence and controversy. And it is also the seeds of so much enlightenment for so many thousands of years. What I want you to know that I discovered when I was in Palestine this trip, which is very different than my last trip, because it was intense and at times scary and chaotic and unpredictable, like life. It was more so. It was like the volume was turned up and you just couldn't understand what might happen next. But what I realized one day is they can bomb this entire nativity square if they want to. They can get rid of the dome. They can, like they did, pulverize Gaza. But they will never defeat the people. The people of Gaza are strong. The people of one spirit are strong. They could take every temple, every sacred site, and destroy it. But the energy, what has been built there, our unity, our universality, our seeds of enlightenment can never be destroyed. Thank you.